Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Now, as the United States marks its 250th anniversary, the celebrations are unfolding against the backdrop of a war in Ukraine, tensions with Iran, and renewed debate over NATO's future. For many, America 250 is more than a historic milestone. It is a test of how the United States sees its role in an increasingly uncertain world. Joining us today on TVP World is Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project, whose work supporting Ukraine offers a unique perspective on American leadership and international security. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be with you.
So looking at this America 250 domestic celebration, does it carry real significance for U.S. foreign policy or a symbolic signaling abroad?
Well, I mean, the timing is coincidental, but at 250 years, we're looking at a bunch of changes in America and the world. We're talking about NATO, and NATO is something that was developed. In 1940, the late 40s. So that was 85 years ago, something like that. There's no one alive today that was involved in the formation of NATO. Yet NATO is still guiding our defense in Europe and our defensive policies around the world. And you've got a lot of divergent opinions of the way that should go inside NATO. European NATO countries in April they spent enough money on Russian petroleum to fund 4,700 drones that Putin could put into Ukraine to kill Ukrainian civilians. So, the alliance is not really functioning as it should.
Right. Going back to the celebrations we're looking at on the screen right now, when people outside the United States watching these celebrations, what do you think they're celebrating? America's history, its values, its current role in the world? My question, I guess, is what do you think foreigners feel, or how do they feel looking at these celebrations?
Well, I'm an American, so it's hard to put my place in my it's hard to take the point of view of a foreigner. But my mother was born in Canada, and she's here because she loves the freedom, she loves the opportunities, she loves the voice that she has in her government. My Ukrainian friends, though they're perhaps unhappy about some of the recent developments in Ukraine policy coming out of the United States, still look to the United States as a beacon of strength, of power, of freedom. I mean, the story of freedom at the beginning of the American Revolution is the same as the beginning of the war in Ukraine. It's a great power trying to colonize and take the resources of a smaller power, and the smaller power fighting back and doing quite well.
Right. Do you think that these parallels that can be drawn between the struggle of Ukraine that is facing right now and America's founding ideals would resonate somehow within Washington?
Yeah, it does. And I'll tell you, it is something that when people see it, when people experience it, they come around and understand it. And there's a lot of conservative influencers that are now people that talk about freedom all the time in kind of the abstract sense, or in America, are now looking at Ukraine and understanding the story of freedom that comes out of Ukraine. And it's one of those things when you go there and you see it, you just walk away and you're like, wow, I want to help these people. So there's a lot of that, more of that going on. But what really resonates with folks in DC is Ukraine winning. And Ukraine is winning this battle against a much larger power. The Russians have about 4 times the population of Ukraine, but the war of attrition is favoring the Ukrainians right now. The president of Finland recently said that there are 8 Russians dying for every Ukrainian that dies. And that's because Russia has this mentality of just pouring meat into the war machine, but they're taking volunteers. And they have yet to put conscripts in, which would be wildly politically unpopular for Putin. But they're paying these volunteers $80,000 signing bonuses. And for the Americans watching, our average monthly wage is 5 times that of Russia. So it's like $400,000 in the United States. It spends in Russia like $400,000. And they're having trouble recruiting people because the average life expectancy of a new recruit coming to the front, is about 35 minutes because of the amazing drone technology the Ukrainians have.
Dang, that's some very devastating numbers. 35 minutes. Can't even imagine that. Now,
Yeah, man. Why would you go for any amount of money?
right? Can imagine really being pushed to the front line voluntarily with that kind of statistics. Now, looking at the most recent Zelensky appeal to Donald Trump, he also made a call to the U.S. president during the 4th of July celebrations as well, calling for additional efforts in putting an end to the war. We have seen America kind of being somewhat distracted in the war in the Middle East, and now that seems to still be a topic over there. But do you think that we might see kind of renewed commitment from the U.S. to start paying attention to the war in Ukraine, especially with the NATO summit coming up?
Well, America is in a global war right now. Poland, Ukraine, all of Europe, Japan, they're all in a global war right now. And America is scrolling TikTok. And nobody understands on the 4th of July, on this day of independence, that freedom is something that needs to be fought for. And, peace and prosperity is not our birthright. There has to be actions taken. There has to be, you have to fight for it. And that's what the Ukrainians are doing. They're fighting for it. And I think that America needs to understand that. And Donald Trump needs to understand that. It worries me that President Trump had a 90-minute conversation with Putin. Nothing good is going to come out of that, because the conversation needs to be about 10 minutes. It needs to be Donald Trump saying, look, you need to make a deal, or there's going to be terrible consequences for you. And that's about a 10-minute conversation. So at 90 minutes, you wonder what the conversation was about. And I've spoken to several people that have spoken to Donald Trump about Ukraine, and he believes that Russia is winning and Russia can't be beat. And he's just getting bad information. And so when the rest of us see what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Russia, 47% of Russia's refining capacity is gone because of Ukrainian strikes deep inside Russia. Moscow has been on fire half a dozen times in the last 60 days. Big billowing clouds of black smoke greeted Vladimir Putin's guests at their St. Petersburg Economic Summit. You can't have an economic summit telling people that it's a great place to invest when there's, clouds of black smoke on the horizon. So it's important that Donald Trump understands this. And the more he does, the more he's going to understand that Putin's a loser and he needs to be jettisoned.
Right. Why do you think it's so hard for Ukraine and its ally to convince the Washington administration or Donald Trump in particular that they can, in fact, take it to Russia? And where do you think that idea of Russia cannot be defeated, even though, over this past 4 years, we have seen that they are pretty much just a paper tiger? Where do you think that kind of mentality is coming from? And do you think that there's any way that Ukraine and its allies can get through to them?
Well, there's a whole cadre of people here in the United States that are Russia experts that have staked their entire careers that Russia is, the second largest, most powerful military in the world, and they're not willing to back down from that. And then there's Russian propaganda. The Russians spend $2 billion annually on propaganda worldwide, and a lot of that goes into America. And and then there's just the news media, which is kind of lazy, and not TVP World, but some of your competitors. It's easy to sit in Warsaw or sit in Washington, D.C. and write a headline, "Today something else blew up in Ukraine," than rather to delve deep into it and look at, they don't have the access in Moscow. There's very few reporters in Moscow. Putin is famous for imprisoning reporters, which puts a chilling effect on the reporting from Moscow. But it just doesn't get out. it's just not something that gets out. And that's something that we at the Ukraine Freedom Project, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C. in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to go office to office and talk to members of Congress and their staff about what we're seeing inside Moscow and inside Russia.
All right. Yeah. Sorry, a little bit loss of words here because, well, I really appreciate what you're trying to do here. And I think breaking through that information sphere is always something that is very difficult to tackle as well. But coming back
you guys are doing great work.
Really appreciate that.
If I tell people if they want good information on Ukraine, they go to TVP World.
All right, we're going to put that on replay for like the next 10 hours. Coming back to our topic, coming back to the anniversary celebration, what do you think American allies are hoping to see from Washington during this anniversary year? Continuity, strength, or something else? A clear long-term strategy?
Yeah, I think that European leaders want to see America's strength, America's leadership. And, again, there's a lot I disagree with Donald Trump on his Ukraine policy, but in his policy with our European allies, there's a lot of stuff that's hard to argue with. There are Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, all these Islamic extremist movements and JV players like Cuba are all working together for the demise of Europe and America and Japan, South Korea, Australia, and other Western powers. And this is for real, and this is going to come to a head. And it's frustrating to see Spain, for instance. Spain is requesting a delay on the European ban on Russian fossil fuels. They have doubled their amount of fossil fuels month over month in the last month that they're importing. And there's the Europe that gets it, like Poland, the Baltic states, and the Scandinavian states, the UK, and then there's the Europe that just wants to live off this peace dividend that expired a long time ago. France, Belgium, Slovakia, Hungary, Turkey. All these countries are importing massive amounts of Russian petroleum. The Europeans are supplying Russia with far more money for its military than they are Ukraine. And so, again, there's a lot of people that need to step up and figure out we're at war and action needs to be taken.
All right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it, Stephen, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Love being with you. Thanks so much.
Yes. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.